Good Friday. We're coming on the air, top of the hour, with new details about the 5 people killed in a North Carolina shooting. Investigators now trying to figure out why a 15-year-old went on a deadly shooting spree. We'll be live from the scene in Raleigh with more coming up next. Plus, hours from now, Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock will go head-to-head with Republican challenger Herschel Walker. This is one of the midterm's most watched races. What to expect from the high-stakes debate coming up. And have you heard this one? Seriously, there's a rumor going around on social media falsely claiming that schools are putting kitty litter on campus for students who identify as cats. It's a lie. How this lie became such a huge talking point for some conservative politicians and also for Joe Rogan. Plus, the USDA now suggesting big changes to fight salmonella. Their plan to bring down cases of food poisoning. And we're taking a closer look at how the floods, the heat waves, the droughts could impact how much you are paying for everyday goods. What climate change might mean for the economy later in the show. Good day, I'm Tom Costello. I'm in for Hallie. And tonight we are starting in North Carolina, where we're learning just before we came on the air that Wake County's district attorney is going to charge the 15-year-old who went on that shooting spree in Raleigh as an adult. President Biden today said, quote, "We have grieved and prayed with too many families, and we are learning more about the 5 people who were killed in the attack. The victims range in age from 16 to 52. Gabriel Torres, an off-duty police officer who was headed to work. 16-year-old James Thompson. Nicole Connors, a caregiver who, we're told, always looked out for others. Her husband talked to NBC News about how his wife of 5 years had left her job in HR to take care of her mom, and she had a stroke after she had a stroke. In a Facebook post, Suzanne Clarnet's sister writes that her sister had the most gentle of hearts. Mary Marshall's fiancé says his world has been completely destroyed by a cowardly individual. 2 others were hurt in the attack. The shooting set off a massive police response and a manhunt that lasted for hours before officers managed to finally get the suspect in custody. Police say they scoured an area of more than 2 miles looking for the alleged killer before they caught up with him. NBC's Priscilla Thompson is on the scene in Raleigh. And Priscilla, right now, I guess we don't know what the motive is. So what comes next?
Right, Tom. That is the big question. Why did this happen? And another big question here, how did this 15-year-old get access to that gun? Was it obtained legally? What were the circumstances of that? And police have not been able to provide any of that information. In fact, they're not even identifying the suspected shooter by name at this point, Tom. Now, what we do know is that police are still investigating. They've likely searched the home of the shooter and are scouring social media for any type of information that they can find. As it stands right now, that shooter remains in the hospital just behind me in critical condition. It's unclear if police have even been able to speak to or interview the shooter about what could have been a potential motive. So still so many questions here. Police say they expect to release a more full report in the coming days. Tom?
All right, Priscilla, can you walk us through the timeline here? Because I understand the suspect is in critical condition. How did this whole thing go down?
Right. So this all erupted late yesterday evening. Police say that it happened over the course of a 2-mile radius. It started on the streets of a neighborhood where this suspect showed up and began shooting. And police say when they arrived, they found 2 victims there, and the suspect had fled onto this greenway area where people were jogging and exercising, continuing to shoot people there. And you talk to people in the community, and this was a time when kids were getting off of the school bus, coming into the house after school activities. My colleague Blaine Alexander, who is on the ground here, spoke with some of the folks in the neighborhood, and I want to play some of how they described the scene as this violence unfolded. Take a listen.
It was chaos. Like I said, you see kids playing in the street. You never see the adults running or anything. You see them walking their dogs or, just walking through the neighborhood, but adults were running.
And that community remained locked down for 4 hours while the manhunt continued to find that shooter. And, of course, police ultimately apprehending him and bringing him here, where the DA, the district attorney, tells us that juvenile charges have already been filed. And as you mentioned, she does intend to transfer those to adult charges. But they are monitoring the condition of the suspect as we speak, Tom.
All right, Priscilla, thank you. Priscilla Thompson in Raleigh for us. All right, now to Georgia, where in a few hours, one of the most highly anticipated debates of the midterm elections will take place between Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican challenger Herschel Walker. Now, this is going to be one to watch. Among the many issues that they will likely discuss, abortion rights. Walker, of course, under fire because he supports a full federal abortion ban, no exceptions, but allegedly paid a woman to have an abortion twice. Warnock's supporters, he supports, I should say, a woman's right to choose. Now, polls suggest Senator Warnock has a very narrow lead over Walker with just 3 days before early voting begins. The Georgia Senate race could decide the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. NBC's Ellison Barber is in Savannah this evening. And Ellison, what are you looking at from this debate? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, the big question is going to be what people are saying about this debate tomorrow, right? But in terms of what we can expect tonight, I think a big question going into this is how Herschel Walker will handle questions that we expect the moderators, we imagine the moderators will ask as it relates to those controversies surrounding his personal life. And I'm particularly interested, too, to see how Senator Raphael Warnock addresses and whether or not he brings up some of those issues, because on the campaign trail, when you go to events with Senator Warnock, he tends to really put a lot of focus and emphasis on the work that he is doing and has done in Washington, D.C. He oftentimes doesn't really mention Herschel Walker by name. He really has not at all responded or commented on these allegations as it relates to the abortion. But tonight, there's the possibility, based on some things that we've heard from his campaign manager, that he will address some of those issues and what he sees as lies and inconsistencies and concerning patterns of behavior in his opponent's background. So that'll be really interesting to watch. I think from the Walker side of things, having spoken with a source close to his campaign, he is really going to try and tie Senator Raphael Warnock to President Joe Biden. That's something we've seen him do on the campaign trail a lot. A big reason for that is because, generally speaking, if you ask someone about Senator Warnock, he's a likable figure here in this state. When you take away all of the politics, all of the developments of the last few months for Herschel Walker, he's also very well liked in this state. He's a beloved former football legend here, right? So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of navigate a lot of the different nuances here. But because Warnock is generally liked by people as an individual, the Walker campaign has really tried to tie him to President Biden, because President Biden's approval rating in this state is very low. In a September poll from the AJC among likely Georgia general election voters, his approval rating here overall was 37%. Tom?
All right. Well, you talked about the fact that Warnock doesn't want to campaign with Biden. On the other hand, of course, Walker has been endorsed by Trump, but he doesn't want to be seen with Trump. So the stakes are high for both of them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting, the Trump factor here, because he did endorse Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker has had a decades-long relationship with him, going back to when he played for a football team that was owned by Donald Trump at the time. But even on the campaign trail of late, he really doesn't talk a lot about Donald Trump. I think really tonight we are going to see a race that is focused on these two individuals and their records. I think the name in terms of a national political figure that we will hear more than anyone is going to be Biden over Trump, and I think that's going to be coming from Herschel Walker. Tom?
All right. Ellison, thank you. Ellison Barber, appreciate it. President Biden is in the Golden State tonight in Irvine, California, hoping to give a midterm boost to Democratic candidates as he continues his West Coast swing. Now, the trip highlights the importance of these midterm elections for control of Congress and the president's agenda going forward. Biden will be speaking soon at an event with Representative Katie Porter, who is battling to win a third term in a newly drawn district there. NBC White House correspondent Mike Memoli is with the president. Mike, the president is mixing the White House business and election business as the leader of the Democratic Party. Less than 4 weeks to go right now till the midterms, right? So what's the strategy?
Well, Tom, Ellison really just laid this out. When you have a president whose approval ratings are still underwater, right? His approval rating is less than his disapproval rating. You don't necessarily have Democratic candidates racing to have the president come in to campaign with him. But you see the seal of the president behind me. This is an official White House event. And what you're going to see is President Biden talking about one of the major issues that is dominating this campaign, inflation, and trying to highlight ways in which Democrats are trying to deal with it. So he's here with Congresswoman Katie Porter. She's running for a third term. It's a lean Democratic district, so it could be susceptible in a Republican wave. And the president's going to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, some of the steps that his administration, working with a Democratic Congress, have taken to try to lower costs for, in this case, prescription drugs for ordinary Americans. He's going to be highlighting the ways in which Katie Porter, as a member of Congress, really pushed for some of these provisions, also a $2,000 cap on out-of-pocket costs. So that's the way the president has really been conducting this campaign business, by highlighting the accomplishments of his administration. But, Tom, you know California as well. A Democrat's coming here often to raise money. We also saw the president last night in Los Angeles raising $5 million for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee alongside House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, making the case to donors they've got to step up and do everything they can to try to keep Democrats in power in Washington.
Okay, well, you mentioned the fact that that district leans blue, and he has been in areas where Democrats have usually been pretty safe. But now he's going to Oregon. So what does that say about the White House strategy?
Yeah, this is really notable, Tom, because, you know, in Oregon, they haven't elected a Republican governor in generations. But you have Tina Kotek, who is the Democratic nominee, facing a really tough race, in part because there is a strong third-party candidate, an independent candidate, who is drawing a lot of support from the Democrats. So in this case, you do have a Democrat saying they want the president to come in and campaign for them. And in part, the message for the president there will be, Democrats, come home. You might be intrigued by the idea, especially in these very divided, polarized times, for an independent voice who can maybe work with both sides of the aisle. But the president's going to try and speak to Democrats specifically and say, too much is at stake. We need you to come home and vote for the Democrat. That's going to be a tall order in a tough year with so many headwinds facing this party.
All right, Mike, thank you. Mike Memoli in California for us tonight. We're also following the aftermath of what is most likely the January 6th committee's final hearing before the midterms. The vice chairwoman of the committee, Liz Cheney, said today that former President Trump, quote, knew about the kind of violence he, Trump, could incite. So take a listen.
What we need to recognize and understand is that President Trump had a premeditated plan to declare victory, no matter the outcome of the election.
It comes as sources tell NBC News that the records of the committee got from the Secret Service actually show numerous calls between the Oath Keepers and the agency just weeks before the attack on the Capitol. And former President Trump not backing down from his false claims that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. He sent a 14-page response to the committee. What the former president did not address was the subpoena they obviously voted on. Sahil Kapoor is our reporter on Capitol Hill. All right, buddy, talk about when do we anticipate the committee will formally issue the subpoena to the former president, and what are the next steps now?
Well, Tom, there is no deadline in that resolution that passed 9-0 as to when that subpoena is to be issued, but it authorizes and directs the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson, to do just that. And of course, in that situation, he would lay out specifically what documents and what form of testimony they expect from the witness, Donald J. Trump. Now, there are not a lot of members of this committee or staffers on this committee that I'm aware of who are, holding their breath for cooperation from the former president on this subpoena, particularly in light of several recent statements he put out attacking this committee since that vote took place. And as you point out, putting out that letter, which repeats his falsehoods and conspiracy theories about a stolen election. And it's worth noting that, there is no criminal penalty for lying on social media. There's no criminal penalty for, putting out a letter on the internet that includes lies. But there is a criminal penalty for lying to Congress under oath. And this, the truth has not been the former president's strength here. His strength has been his, political, visceral connection to voters, in large part by creating this alternate reality where he won the 2020 election. And we do see him using this planned subpoena to stir up his political base in advance of a potential 2024 presidential run.
Yeah, all right. There's also a lot of fallout over the Secret Service. We're seeing a lot of warning signs ahead of the January 6th committee, not changing plans ahead of the ordeal. And now we've got this reporting that a member of the Secret Service was communicating with Oath Keepers. This, as some of them are on trial right this very minute, right?
Correct. There has been quite a bit of criticism about the Secret Service for having all this information, for having all these forewarnings that an attack like we saw on this Capitol, on January 6th was going to happen, that many people were planning just such attack, and the fact that they didn't take more actions to try to stop it. That's been a criticism of law enforcement across the board, Tom. And there is also, of course, that communication that was unearthed between the Secret Service and the Oath Keepers, which is a far-right group whose leader is currently on trial for seditious conspiracy. The Secret Service responded to this. I want to put this response from the Secret Service up on the screen. They say, yes, they reached out concerning logistics about demonstration areas and rules for attending presidential events. This is common activity between organized groups and advance agents, unquote. In other words, they're saying nothing to see here, that the Secret Service regularly communicates with all sorts of groups, that are planning these sorts of events to get an understanding of what they want and to make clear to them what's valid and invalid. Still, it is possible that Congress will pursue these leads on the Secret Service a little bit further. One key member of the January 6th committee, Jamie Raskin, who's also making a play to be the next chairman of the Oversight Committee, said it's an important and urgent matter to look further into this Secret Service issue. Tom.
All right, more to come there. Sahil, thank you very much. Now to an NBC News exclusive interview, and boy, is this one a big one. It's with one of President Putin's closest allies, the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko. Earlier today, he sat down with NBC's Keir Simmons, telling him that when it comes to nuclear weapons, President Putin should not be pushed there. Take a listen.
Do you think President Putin would use a nuclear weapon?
If you put a person or a country into the corner, there is only one way out from there, to move forward. That's why you don't cross red lines. You cannot cross them.
All right, Lukashenko adding that he does think Russia can essentially cope without using nukes because, in his words, Russia has some of the most modern weapons. They just haven't used them yet. It comes as Lukashenko was at this meeting today in Kazakhstan for the Commonwealth of Independent States. President Putin was also there, announcing he's managed to get more than 200,000 new troops from his partial mobilization to join the fight in Ukraine, with 100,000 more expected in the coming weeks. NBC's Keir Simmons joins us now from Kazakhstan. All right, Keir, let's start with the big nuclear question, because Lukashenko told you Putin should not be backed into a corner. But he also says it's unlikely that Russia will use them anyway.
Yeah, it's reassuring, Tom, and then it's also chilling at the same time. And I think the way that you unpick this really is that a crucial piece that you laid out there, which is that President Lukashenko points out, and it is the case, that Russia has a lot of air weaponry still, including, the Russian equivalent of B-52s standing by. It does have the capability, and President Putin had kind of warned on this today, at the same time as saying that they won't take further action, if you like, from now. So, there's this picture that President Putin doesn't want to use nuclear weapons, but does have a lot of arsenal, if you like. Take a listen to more of that answer.
If nuclear weapons were to be used by even one country, because it would cause a chain reaction, Russia understands this very well. And no one, I want to highlight once again, and I know this for certain from President Putin, no one sets the use of nuclear weapons as a goal. I am absolutely sure of it. We need to look for peaceful solutions to this conflict. It's beneficial for everyone, including the U.S.
All right, but Lukashenko also talked about how close he and Putin are, that their relationship has gotten even stronger, I guess. So the question really also becomes, he needs Putin, and does Putin need him? Might we see Belarusian troops get involved in the conflict fighting on Russia's side?
Yeah, that's one way that things could escalate, and that is something that President Putin, we think, is pretty keen to see have happened. Now, just keep in mind that President Lukashenko, for example, just this week, Tom, his country, Belarus, voted against that UN resolution, alongside countries like Syria and North Korea, against that UN resolution against Russia's offensive in Ukraine. So that's the position that he's coming from. We wanted to know whether he would, in fact, kind of put his servicemen, if you like, in harm's way in favor of his support for President Putin. Take a listen. Will Belarus join the Russian offensive?
We have already said many times that we are taking part in the military operation and that we support Russia in various ways. Today, our involvement includes providing medical care to Russians and Ukrainians, to provide food for Russians and Ukrainians, and most importantly and significantly, we provide asylum for refugees from Ukraine. We take in 400 to 500 of them daily. We provide them with fully equal rights. This is our participation. But we weren't killing anyone there and are not planning to do so.
So, to put it bluntly, Tom, his answer is no. He doesn't plan to get involved in the conflict in that direct kind of a way, which may tell you something. There were here in Kazakhstan talks today with President Putin here and President Erdogan of Turkey. Talks about the possibility of negotiations. Fundamental point, Tom, I think the problem here is that question over territory. So Russia is not going to want to concede putting back with territory. Ukraine will not want to concede, and its backers in the US and NATO will not want to concede, allowing Russia to hold any territory that is taken.
Yeah, that's a big interview, and it's well after 3 in the morning there where Keir is in Kazakhstan. So, Keir, thank you. You can watch much more of Keir's exclusive interview coming up on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, 6:30 Eastern Time. Still ahead, Elon Musk says SpaceX cannot keep paying for internet service in Ukraine, who he wants to pay for instead in our 5 things. Plus, the USDA is trying to stop food poisoning where it starts. At the same time, the FDA is trying to clear up confusion about Best Buy and date labeling on foods. So what's behind these food revolutions? Coming up next. We're back, and the USDA is proposing sweeping new changes to fight food poisoning. It involves a major overhaul in the way chicken and turkey meats are processed. Every year, more than 1 million people get sick with bacterial disease from poultry. Now, for the most part, it's up to cooks to avoid illness from raw poultry by handling it carefully in the kitchen, following the usual advice to not wash raw chicken or turkey because you can spread salmonella. Use separate utensils when preparing the meat and make sure it's cooked to the right temperature. Well, now the USDA wants to fight illness like salmonella and poisoning across the board with food poisoning by starting with the farmers who raise the birds and following through in the processing plant where the meat is actually made. Let's bring in now one of our contributors, our doctor expert. Sorry, my phone goes off at the most inopportune times. I apologize, Doctor. Dr. Akshay Saul is here to talk about these proposed safety measures involving poultry. Dr. Salmonella in poultry is a complex problem with no single solution. How might these new proposed changes help people to avoid getting sick?
Well, good evening, Tom. Good to be with you. You know, salmonella, it's a problem. Food poisoning is a problem. We see, over 1 million cases of this alone diagnosed every year. And so what they're really trying to do with these rules is to take the onus off the consumer and try to bring it, a little bit ahead of before it gets to your plate. And some things they're looking at doing, are checking for these specific types of salmonella that cause most of the food poisoning. So, for example, there's over 2,000 little variants of salmonella that exist, but there's really only a few that cause most of the cases of food poisoning. So by targeting those and by, checking for levels of salmonella in the food, in the processing plant, with a little bit more frequency, they're hoping to avoid some of those cases.
All right, now scientists, farmers, and researchers are all playing a role in the government's goal to come up with new rules and regulations that they hope can happen in the next 2 years. But what can people do in the meantime?
Yeah, well, a lot of it is what you said before. Nobody wants to be the guy who's cooking with a thermometer, but you want to make sure chicken and turkey, which are two of the most common causes of salmonella poisoning, are cooked to 165 degrees. You want to make sure you're not washing the meat, because when you wash the meat, you can splatter that bacteria all over the counter. I mean, especially if you're, over the age of 65, or if you are somebody who's pregnant, you really want to be careful about this because you could be at an increased risk of those adverse effects.
I'm sorry. I did not know that you don't wash it because you could spread the bacteria, and now I know. So I learned something. Doctor, thank you very much. Happy Friday. Appreciate your time.
Anytime.
All right. With inflation sending grocery prices through the roof, American families are trying to stretch their dollars, especially in the kitchen. But date labels on packaged foods like milk and meat and juice and pantry snacks also open up a can of confusion. Now, the variety of terms like used before, sell by, and expires on are confusing and make it difficult to know what can stay and what you got to throw out. One survey reveals more than 90% of people throw away food too early because they misinterpret the labels. The inconsistent labels are now prompting the FDA to push for more standardized terminology in your grocery store aisles. NBC's Vicki Nguyen joins me now with more on this. Vicki, the average family of four losing $1,500 a year to uneaten food. So talk about what the FDA recommends to hopefully clear up the confusion.
Yeah, Tom, it's a big problem. That's a lot of money. Americans throw out collectively $161 billion worth of food that's perfectly good to eat, according to the USDA. This is every single year. A lot of that is because of the confusion. People just don't know what is safe and what isn't. So the FDA, they don't actually require food makers to put an expires on date on anything except for baby formula. Now they are trying to standardize the labeling. So they want food makers to say best if used by to indicate an item's peak freshness. They want the label to say used by for perishables like the milk, the juice, the meat. Some people don't think that goes far enough. Best if used by and used by, they're so close. People want some more definitiveness, like throw this out by this date. The problem is it's tricky. Your fridge, Tom, might be colder than my fridge. Your climate of your pantry. There's different factors that go into every food, but the FDA thinks this is a helpful step towards curbing that food waste.
I heard you on the Today Show this morning, and I agree with the anchors who said, I wanted to say you will get sick on this day if you don't throw it out, because you do get confused by all of this, right? So what are some other things people should pay attention to right now?
Use your nose, Tom, the old smell test. If it doesn't smell right, then it is spoiled. You also want to look at the food and look for changes in the consistency or the texture. Another tip I really like is keeping a Sharpie near your pantry or your fridge. Write down when you open that box or that can or that jar, and it gives you a sense, whoa, this has been in the fridge for a year. Maybe it's time to go, or, oh, I just opened this last month. It's okay. And finally, you can use apps. There's one called Food Keeper, for example, and you just enter in the item that you're wondering about. If it's deli meat, for example, Food Keeper says, all right, it's good 3 to 5 days after you open it or you bring it home, as long as it's been refrigerated. All of these to help protect you from getting food poisoning. Tom?
Yeah, the Sharpie idea is a good one. My wife uses that. Vicki, thank you very much. All right, let's get you over now to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Scottish actor Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid in the Harry Potter series, died today at the age of 72. Beloved by fans, he played Hogwarts groundkeeper in all 8 movies. He was also known for his role in the British crime series Cracker. Coltrane won the BAFTA for Best Actor for his performance in that show 3 years in a row. Harry Potter's Harry Potter's star, Daniel Radcliffe, said Coltrane was one of the funniest people he knew. Number 2, Elon Musk says SpaceX cannot continue to fund Starlink terminals in Ukraine indefinitely. Starlink is super important for Ukraine's military communications because it basically allows them to stay online. A U.S. official says SpaceX asked the Pentagon to take over funding and confirmed the Pentagon received communication from SpaceX, but said that it has not made any decisions on how to proceed yet. Last week, Musk said Starlink has already cost his company $80 million. Number 3, the first flu report of the season is out. It shows early increases in cases in most of the U.S. Right now, areas across the South are reporting the highest level of activity. The CDC is recommending everybody 6 months or older should get a flu vaccine by the end of this month. Number 4, Kroger is buying its grocery rival Albertsons for more than $24 billion. Kroger is the second biggest grocer in the United States behind Walmart. Albertsons is fourth combined. They will still hold the second place spot, but would be closer to Walmart. Together, they would employ more than 700,000 people across 5,000 stores. Both companies' boards approved the deal. Now it just needs regulatory approval. Number 5, just as we started the show, NASA and SpaceX's Crew 4 splashed down off the coast of Florida. The spacecraft Freedom undocked from the International Space Station this morning. The crew spent about 6 months in orbit. Still to come, how a rumor about litter boxes in schools became a Republican talking point. Litter boxes, and what the schools are saying about that coming up. You know this, climate change is costing us not just the environment, but it's also hitting our wallets. How it's impacting inflation, coming up in just a few minutes. But first, right now, yet another rumor is spreading like wildfire on and offline. It's been repeated by at least 20 conservative candidates and even Spotify's Joe Rogan. They are falsely claiming that some K-12 schools are putting litter boxes on campus to accommodate students who identify as cats. Yeah, you heard that right. Every school district that GOP candidates say are doing this told NBC or have said in public statements that these litter box claims are simply not true. The rumor started on social media. Now, people would post about how they've seen supposedly litter boxes firsthand at schools, and then it took off from there, getting repeated and amplified online. And so now politicians like Representative Lauren Boebert and other Republicans are using this lie as a talking point, arguing that protections for LGBTQ students are extreme in the context of cats. NBC's Ben Collins reported on this story. Ben, you're shaking your head. It just is hard to believe this.
Yeah, Tom, look. I know this sounds very stupid, and it is. Like, people should not be believing this stuff. It's very dumb. But it's also very harmful. It's very harmful to, for example, trans kids and LGBTQ kids who have this sort of lie pushed on them as a way to try to delegitimize their personhood. And that's exactly what the point of this is. It has gone around school districts all throughout the country from, we noticed from Prince Edward Island in Canada all the way to California, from Ohio to Florida. We've seen it everywhere on Facebook. Somebody claiming their niece had this happen to them, or their in Joe Rogan's case, their friend's wife had this happen at their school. There is no school where this happened, but there is one thing that is true. Some schools do have cat litter in their closets, and it's for active shooter situations that last for hours or days. They need that for really gruesome circumstances, but it has nothing to do with kids identifying as cats.
Yeah. All right. Let's spell that out then, because people are going to say, well, why would a school need cat litter? And it's because, God forbid, you have kids who are locked down for a long period of time and they need to relieve themselves. That would be an option, correct? But it's not for kids who are identifying as an animal.
Tom, that's exactly right. In fact, we called all of these schools who have been, I would say, afflicted with this rumor. That's probably the best way to put it. And all of them said it's ridiculous and it's not true. But one was Jefferson County Schools in Colorado. This is where Columbine was. And they said, yes, we do. We have cat litter in our schools, but for that purpose, for this very horrible worst case scenario. But it's being used as this culture war cudgel. It's being used to try to make LGBTQ kids more afraid of identifying as who they are, because they are trying to make it so it's conflated with furries and, identifying as cats and all this stuff. It's this old 90s trope about, the slippery slope about gay marriage. It's being applied to these kids now.
So what's happening here also just shows how lies on social media are able to leave the online world and become political talking points for real issues, right? Like gender identity. So you kind of hinted how this is having an impact on kids. How is it having an impact on the political discourse?
Yeah, it's a big deal. The most downloaded podcast in the country this week talked about this, from Joe Rogan. talking to Tulsi Gabbard, who clearly has political ambition, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, all of those household names. It's become part of the stump speech for these people. It's a big part of this much larger campaign to demonize the LGBTQ community, to make them seem unserious. But it's just being spread from TikTok and Facebook. It's being spread from these social media companies, from these social media posts, as people are just spreading rumors that they are making up of whole cloth.
And we've been through this for the last 6 or 7 years or so, maybe longer if you count the birther movement. How are social media companies supposed to respond and deal with this? How should the rest of us respond and deal with this? Do we call BS when we hear BS?
Yeah, you should probably call BS on this one when you hear BS. And look, there are a lot of people who, it hurts their feelings to say that, to say like, hey, where did you actually hear this from? But really ask them, think about this. Where did you actually hear this from? Social media, it's tough because all of these have different variations. A lot of people don't think they're spreading lies when they're spreading these lies. But the other thing is here, like, it's auto-completing in search boxes. If you type in the word litter, which could mean a lot of different things, it auto-completes in Facebook and Twitter and TikTok search box to litter boxes in schools, which will lead you directly to these lies. So it's an algorithmic problem, but it's mostly just a hearsay problem. You really got to have your BS detector up.
All right. Well, we call BS on this one. Ben, thank you for bringing it to us. I feel sorry for how much time you have to spend in these dark places on the internet, but thank you for bringing it to us, Ben. We appreciate it. As we head into the weekend, we have real polar opposites in the weather department. Now, the Pacific Northwest facing some real heat. Seattle has already set a record for the most days in October, hitting 75 degrees or more. While parts of the Midwest are getting their first snow of the season. The cold front there will be moving to the east for some of the coldest temps of the season so far. Record-setting weather doesn't only impact when we put the shorts away. The changing climate also affects the prices that we pay at the register. Experts say if severe weather events keep happening more often, it could devastate important industries like energy, transportation, agriculture. Torrential rain, flooding, heat waves, and droughts can mess with agriculture yields, infrastructure functionality, and workers' ability to stay on the job. They could also be affected, and that all could lead to greater supply chain issues. And when costs go up for companies, that means they usually go up for all of us at the checkout counter. Take Florida right now after Hurricane Ian hit. Frozen orange juice concentrate went up by more than 5% just for a time because the state's citrus belt was hit by all the flooding there. Bill Cairns joins us now to talk about this. He's been looking into it. So, Bill, we just got this latest inflation report showing it's not slowing down. Prices keep going up, and we hear it from the experts all the time. Climate disasters getting worse. How could this impact the prices that we are all going to be paying in the future?
Tom, I like to call this the cost of doing nothing, or say maybe the cost of only doing, not enough. So economists are saying now the inflation number, climate change is not a major factor in it, but it is a small factor, and it's a growing factor as we go through time. It's only going to get worse decade after decade. So we just heard from our government a couple days ago. They came out and told us that we are already at 15 weather events this year alone that are what we call billion-dollar weather disasters. That's about double our 33-year average. If you notice, the two in blue, Fiona and Ian, we're still adding up the cost of those. But look at all the problems in the middle of the country with severe weather in May, June, and April. Of course, that's the planned, growing time for a lot of the early season crops. And then, of course, the West with the drought and the heat waves and the fires. We've all seen a lot about that. So here's the alarming number about the number. Now, this is a small sample size. This only goes back about the last decade. But if this trend continues, it's alarming. We average about 8 events per year for billion-dollar weather disasters. Look at these numbers, almost double every single year. In 2020, it was almost triple. We're already at 15 this year, Tom. So we are seeing an increase in the number of billion-dollar weather disasters. And that, of course, those costs are going to hit you and me eventually. And the people that are right in the heart of it, like the people in Fort Myers, they're being hit directly.
Yeah, of course. And then there is the human side of it as well, right? Severe weather impacts people who work outdoors and in factories, and that has to be taken into consideration as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we have to think about, the warming planet, what that means. Obviously, in the winter months, it's not as severe for outdoor workers, but especially in the summer. So the EPA has come out with statements to say, like, the climate change can and it will disrupt food availability. It'll reduce agriculture, interrupt food delivery. And also, we're going to see spikes in food prices after extreme events, like you just mentioned with the orange prices in Florida. And just take in consideration, outdoor workers, they're going to need more breaks, they're going to be less productive, and they're going to demand higher wages for working in harsher conditions. And all of that will be passed back on to us. And then take into account what happened in China this summer in the Sichuan province. They had one of the worst heat waves they've ever seen. They had to shut down all of the factories for 6 days. That included a Toyota factory. Well, a lot of raw material factories had to close down, which then had a ripple effect on the chain of supply. So, Tom, you can see, these events are starting, and we're going to hear more about them in the news in the years ahead.
Yeah, and so now the messaging shift, right? So this is not just an environmental issue. It is obviously a major factor in our economy, too, and it affects people's jobs.
Yeah, and all of a sudden when people start realizing it's affecting their jobs and also the money, people start looking at it differently instead of just an environmental. So the reinsurance firm from Swiss, they actually did a study, and they wanted to project, how much is climate change going to cost us? And for the U.S. alone, they said it would be equivalent to 10% of our gross domestic product by 2050. We're in the U.S., we're a little better off than other countries. They said other nations could be as high as 18%. And so we know some of these latest disasters, especially Fiona and Ian, we're going to be over $100 billion this year. I think we're easily going to go over $100 billion. And if you look at the costliest years on record, Tom, the thing to notice is the years. 2017, 2020, 2021. We're going to add 2022. And this goes back over 30, 40 years. And a lot of these years are recent. So these storms are getting costlier and we're having more of them. And you can see these are numbers that are not trending in a good direction for anyone's pocketbook.
Yeah, it's a lot more extreme than when we were kids. Bill, thank you very much. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read, watch, or listen to every one of them, our bureau teams have done it for you. And that's what they tell us is going on down in their regions. It's a segment we like to call The Local. We'll start down in our Southeast Bureau. The judge in the Parkland shooting trial will allow an investigation after one of the jurors reportedly said they felt threatened by another juror during deliberations. Those deliberations ended with a life sentence for the school shooter, Nicholas Cruz. Prosecutors who called for the investigation into the alleged threat say they are not trying to invalidate the jury's vote. They just reported it for safety reasons. From our Western Bureau, Alaska canceled its snow crab season for the first time. Why? Because of a huge decline in the crab population. The Red King crab season isn't happening this year either. Scientists are trying to figure out what's going on here, but they think it's because the water temps spiked when a lot of young crabs were clustered together and they didn't have enough food. This crab collapse could really hurt Alaska's economy and the economies of the state's fishing crews as well. Also from our Bureau out west, Fat Bear Week might be over, but bears are still looking for a place to hibernate. This one in Colorado found a spike right underneath the deck, and authorities there say it took about 10-year-old, he looks 10 years old, weighs as much as 400 pounds, and it took a tranquilizer dart and 5 Colorado Parks and Wildlife officers to move him. We'll see you on Monday, same time, same place. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.